Julius, the Scion of Darkness, has arrived from his Grand Hero battle and is ready to lay down the debuffs just like his other family members. Surprisingly, I didn't have too much trouble with his Inferno stage, and Fjorm once again can completely stop Julius and his already primed Draconic Aura special. Now, even though we recently got Sias, Julius interests me a lot because of his unique weapon. Before we discuss that further, let's go over his stats. Julius is a red infantry mage, and his 5-star base stats are 38 HP, 35 attack, 27 speed, 16 defense, and 35 resistance. Things that stand out are his really good 35 attack and his amazing 35 resistance, which is up there for the second highest res stat in the game. As with most mages, Julius is pretty fail physically, and his 27 speed means he will most likely be getting doubled by a lot of things that attack him. You probably should not let him tank more than one physical hit, but with 38 HP, Julius can at least avoid getting one shot in some cases. That being said, we have to talk about Julius's unique weapon, Loptous, more to really see how you can utilize his stat line. Loptous is one of the more interesting weapons in the game, and I do believe it sets a new standard for skill effects that we have yet to see in Heroes. It's got a lot of text, but it can be broken down into 3 parts. First off, Loptous grants a flat +3 resistance, meaning Julius actually has 38 resistance, and that's more than any other unit in the game, not considering a plus res nature. For a free reward unit, that is definitely impressive. Moving on to the second part, skills with effective against dragons are effective against this unit. So essentially, Falchion, upgraded Binding Blade, and the 2 Nagatoms will be effective when used against Julius. With his fail, physical bulk, I'm pretty sure any Falchion user will literally make Julius explode if they touch him. Julia and Deirdre on the other hand have to combat the weapon triangle since they are both green units, and because both of them are pretty slow, I don't think they can KO Julius even with that extra 1.5 times multiplier. The third and last part of Loptous is basically its own effect. If the foe has no skills with effective against dragons, it inflicts a attack -6 debuff during combat. So as long as Julius fights anyone else but the Falchion, Binding Blade, and Naga users, he will debuff the enemy by -6 attack during combat. I believe this is the first time we've ever seen a skill that inflicts an in-combat debuff, because all in-combat effects so far are skills like Death Blow or Steady Stance, which grant the user a buff. Loptous now sets the precedence for maybe a new set of skills that can debuff during combat. This is a positive because that means you can stack Loptous' effect with a field attack debuff, and that is really strong. I want to talk about Loptous a lot more, but first let's get through the rest of Julius' base kit because it already synergizes with this new weapon. Julius' special is Draconic Aura, probably because as we've seen he's got a whole dragon motif going on. Now to be honest, it's an okay special, but as a 3-turn special, it's completely outclassed by Iceberg thanks to Julius' 38 resistance. Draconic Aura is 30% of his 49 attack, which is a 14 damage proc. Iceberg is 50% of his 38 res, which is a 19 damage proc. So if you want a 3-turn special on Julius, I'd have to recommend swapping Draconic Aura to Iceberg. As for his B skill, Julius comes with Guard 3, and that's a good defensive skill because while he can tank magical attacks for days, he may give the enemy special charges if he can't KO them himself. Julius' C skill is Attack Ploy, and this is amazing because it stacks on top of Loptous' -6 attack combat debuff. Now that we've covered Julius' skills, let's go back to his stat line and Loptous to see what kind of monster this guy can actually become. So now let's talk about Loptous, especially its synergy with Attack Ploy. So if you land Attack Ploy, then Julius can debuff the enemy's attack by -11 in combat, which is kind of insane. So if you are wondering why these effects stack, it's because Loptous' -6 effect is our first combat debuff. If you are familiar with stacking combat buffs, then this is no different. Attack Ploy is essentially a field debuff, and similar to field buffs and combat buff stacking, the same applies to field and combat debuffs. I think an attack debuff is actually pretty powerful because you can think of it both like a defense and res buff. If you only buff your own resistance, then you're still susceptible to physical attacks. By debuffing the enemy's attack by the same amount, it doesn't matter whether they deal physical or magical damage. For Julius, this would be like almost adding +11 to his defense and resistance, which would be 27 defense and a ridiculous 49 resistance. I have to say almost because it's not like you can use those stats to boost specials like Iceberg, which depend on the res stat of a unit. One thing to think about regarding attack debuffs is that Heavy Blade suddenly becomes a lot more attainable to proc. A -11 attack debuff is huge, and Julius has 49 attack with Loptous equipped, meaning an enemy would have to have 60 attack to avoid Heavy Blade activation from Julius. That doesn't include any type of attack buffs Julius has himself. Basically, if Julius can set up Attack Ploy, he is going to be a really hard to KO with tome users. He is still a little slow, and in Arena a lot of powerful offensive mages will double him with no problem. Julius holds a similar role to units like Micaiah, Deirdre, and Winter Tharja in that they can tank magic damage pretty well, but you have to account for the fact that he will get doubled a lot. However, if you can bump up his res stat high enough, Julius can shrug off multiple hits with no problem. Let me show you one example. Here we have a 5-star Julius versus a 5-star Reinhardt with a plus attack nature and the full plus 6 attack buff from Honed Cavalry. Julius with his base kit can survive Reinhardt if he lands attack ploy 3 before the fight. He also needs guard if Reinhardt is running the infamous Quicken Pulse plus Moonbow combo. Even though Julius has sky high resistance, it's still impressive that as a red unit he can survive the onslaught of Reinhardt with just his base kit. To make things a little more fun, I now have a Reinhardt that is plus 10 merged on top of everything. Julius can still survive this monster as long as he gets 2 extra points of resistance somewhere, which is pretty easy to do considering this is without an A skill. This showcases just how crazy the -11 attack from Loptous and attack ploy can be. Now I wouldn't recommend using Julius to tank Reinhardts, but it's just a fitting example. Now just a last little point before we move on, I think combat debuffs are very interesting. We've been stacking buffs for so long now, but what happens if skills appear that allow you to stack debuffs? Currently most debuffs have to be applied outside of combat, whether it's through ploy type skills or after a fight like with dagger users. But Loptous applies its debuff during the fight and that is way more powerful. I'm interested to see more of these combat debuffs and I bet we will see more of them in the future. I would also love to see dagger users get this type of effect in some way since debuffs are pretty much their whole class gimmick. Definitely something to look out for in the future. Let's discuss some builds next. First up, Julius can be a great unit to run on a budget build because he already sets himself up for a simple magical tank role. His assist skill can be anything you want, but I would again suggest swapping out Draconic Aura for Iceberg if you want that 3-turn special. Glacius is also not a bad option if you want Julius to have a nuke after his first engagement. To fill his A skill, Julius has a few simple options such as Res plus 3, HP plus 5, or even Speed plus 3 to just avoid a little extra bit of doubles. We give Julius the quick riposte seal because combined with guard, it makes him very tough to bring down unless you hit him with physical attacks. It also lets Julius pick up a few extra KOs, which is always good. Overall, with 38 base resistance, Julius is already a great mage tank, and including the -6 or potential -11 attack debuff on the enemy only makes him that much tougher. For our second build, we are going to crank his tanky potential up to 11 by doubling down on distant defense skills. This would mean Julius sits at 28 defense and a ridiculous 50 resistance whenever he is attacked by a ranged enemy. Basically, you still want to focus on applying attack ploy, and in combination with Loptous, Julius will become an unkillable monster for any red or green mages. You basically have to attack him with physical attacks to deal damage, and even archers and dagger users may struggle in taking him down thanks to the extra defense. Now there are other A skills available ranging from rare to budget options. Julius may honestly be overshooting on resistance, so Steady Stance would give him that extra defense against even melee threats to potentially keep him alive. Mirror Stance would be nice to have some extra attack if you don't plan to have Julius fight physical ranged units. Brazen Defense / Res could also work, but it sort of doesn't synergize well with Quick Riposte, so I wouldn't highly recommend it. Other options are simply HP plus 5 or Res plus 3 again. Now keep in mind, Julius is reaching insane levels of resistance with this type of build, and that doesn't even include any buffs you give to him. If you can give him a defense or res tactic buff, Julius will be stacking so many defensive buffs along with his potential -11 attack debuff. Things can really start to get out of hand. Now for the last build, it's not so much something I can wholeheartedly say is good, but I want to mention it anyway. I slightly mentioned it earlier, but because Julius is debuffing the enemy's attack by so much, he could try to run Heavy Blade and guarantee its procs not by having the highest attack out there, but by bringing his opponent's attack way down. I would still run him as a defensive tank, but using Heavy Blade and Quick Repulse would allow Julius to charge specials a lot faster. For example, with Glacius, he can proc it in one round of combat if he is attacked twice and counters with his Quick Repulse follow-up. Julius is somewhat slow, so it isn't the hardest thing to achieve. If you go with Aether on a 5-turn cooldown, Julius would have it up fully charged to unleash on another enemy, which actually may be useful to heal back into Quick Repulse range. I do think this is a cool build idea, but Heavy Blade is a bit tough to get a hold of, and if you use it as a Sacred Seal, then you probably want a good A skill to match distant defense. I would say it's kind of gimmicky, but the idea is there. Loptous already applies that -6 attack debuff, and the enemy can't avoid that unless they have a Dragon Killer weapon. Just with that, Julius would proc Heavy Blade against opponents with 54 attack, and including attack ploy would make the threshold 59 attack. I would put this type of build up there with a close counter build where I think it can work, but you're going to have to work for it. Definitely not perfect, but a nice idea overall. So should you promote Julius to 5 stars? Well, right off the bat, his stat line and his skills scream magical tank, and for a free reward unit, I would say Julius is a pretty valuable asset. If you encounter Julius, you must make sure you are aware of Loptous' attack debuff and be wary to not get hit by his attack ploy. He becomes deceptively tanky thanks to that huge -11 attack total debuff. To take him out, a fast melee unit will do the job very well. For Julius, Loptous really does set him apart from other heroes and solidifies his role as a tanky unit. Draconic Aura is a bit of a letdown, but Guard and Attack Ploy just synergize really well with the idea of a slow unit just being so tanky that he doesn't care about getting hit multiple times and enemies can't feed off of him for special charges. Julius gets a lot of value out of those two skills. So while Julius doesn't come in multiple ploys like Arvis or Sias, he is the first to have a combat debuff and it makes him a very formidable foe. Something to consider is that this could be the start of more in-combat debuffing skills being introduced, and these do stack with each other. If we start seeing more of these type of effects, Julius could see benefit from them. Last, Loptous has an amazing animation and it's definitely very cool to see that dragon roar. I also love Julius's voice lines because they are just so stereotypical edgelord and he really just reminds me of some anime bad guy. Overall, I think Julius can be useful without spending a ton of investment and can be even better with some high tier skills. He's not a must have, but for modes like Arena Assault, he might be nice to have just to be a huge tank against mages. I think Julius is a nice pickup, especially if you don't have one of these few units who can reach insane levels of resistance. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on Julius, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one.
I cannot stand the sight of Reinhardt. The next time he appears before me, he will die. Huh? Ah! Die! To me, you're nothing.